All right, we're recording again. Let me pull up the chapter 7 PowerPoint. Bear with me, please. Does anybody remember what chapter 7 is about? What are we getting into? And if you need a hint, think about what we're doing in lab.
Photosynthesis using light to make food.
Perfect. Yep. I can barely hear you, but it sound like you said the correct thing. We are going to be talking about photosynthesis. And remember, big picture, chapter 5, the most important thing we learned is that cells need ATP to live. Chapter 6, which we just finished, said we break down glucose to make that ATP. Chapter 7 is basically saying this is how we get from sun energy to the glucose energy, right? So here we're connecting all the dots in this chapter. Once I can get it pulled up. Come on. Slowly but surely. All right. And we're in business. Okay. Why? Come on. Excuse me. Now then, can someone please one more time confirm that you can hear me and see the PowerPoint? Actually, you don't need to confirm it. Nothing should have changed. Anyway, yes, chapter 7. Here we go. This is it. We are talking about photosynthesis, using light to make food. And I would recommend studying for this the same way I recommended studying the last chapter, which is what I said, where you start with the basics and then start adding details. So like the last chapter, we would say, the purpose of cellular respiration is to make ATP. Once you have that memorized, then say, we break down glucose to make ATP. Once you have that memorized, we break down glucose in the presence of oxygen to make ATP. That's how you're going to do it. I also recommend making sure when it comes to studying, make sure you understand cellular respiration before you really start studying photosynthesis, because essentially, in some ways, photosynthesis is just like the opposite of respiration, and you'll see why. You'll see what I mean. Your book talks about why photosynthesis matters before we get started. Basically, we wouldn't have life on Earth without it, right? Because you eat. Even if you eat a lot of meat and don't eat a lot of plants, the meat you ate did eat plants, right? So it's all important. Let's jump into it. First, we're going to talk about the basics of photosynthesis, sort of like the same way we did with chapter 6. Remember chapter 6, we had the big overview, and then we went in and added the details. We're going to do the same thing here. And we're going to give you some background information that you need to know before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of the process. All right. Photosynthesis is used by photoautotrophs. That includes plants, algae, and certain bacteria. I'm not going to ask you about that on the exam. That's just for your own information. We already know that photosynthesis transforms light energy into chemical energy. That is a question on the lab. Yeah, the pre-lab, and some people still have gotten that wrong. So I'm telling you now, there's the answer. So if you have it wrong, just go fix it. Light energy is transformed into chemical energy. So photosynthesis does not create energy. It just converts it from solar energy to chemical energy. Please don't mess that up. Any questions about that concept? All right. That chemical energy is used for stuff: food, clothing, wood, other kinds of energy, right? Coal, the energy in coal came from photosynthesis because it was plants millions of years ago converting that solar energy into chemical energy. And then those plants turned into coal. Millions of years later, we burn it and we release energy. Anyway, nothing on that bullet point is going to be on the exam. So even though it's important to know, I guess, for day-to-day life, I'll put it next to this, meaning won't be on the exam. And if I can see this correctly, there we go. That also will not be on the exam. So there you go. Most important thing as far as the exam is concerned here, is that photosynthesis transforms light energy into chemical energy. Here's some pictures of what we're talking about. There's plants, in case you've never seen a plant. There's some algae, in case you've never seen that. There's some photosynthetic bacteria, in case you've never seen that. So here we go. Let's talk about the basics. Chloroplasts. This is where it all happens. This is the test question. Someone's going to get it wrong, and it's going to break my heart because I always put it on there hoping that it's an easy question. The question will say something like, which one takes place in mitochondria? Which one takes place in the chloroplast? And the answer is respiration takes place in mitochondria. Photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Someone's going to miss it. It's an easy question. But let's talk about it. Chloroplasts, what are they? It's basically, again, it's just where photosynthesis happens. It is the site of photosynthesis. They are light-absorbing organelles, and they're found mostly on the interior of the leaves. And I'm going to put an X through this because, again, not that it's not important. I'm just trying to help you study. I'm not going to ask you about those on the exam. You do need to know chloroplast is where photosynthesis happens. Other than that, don't worry about it. I'm sure you guys have already heard of the word chlorophyll. It's a pigment. It's green, right? Hopefully you're not learning it. Hopefully you guys already knew that from elementary school, in middle school, and high school.
Hello?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you when you get a chance to say,
Okay.
text me your
Like I said, and in case you didn't know what a pigment is a light-absorbing molecule. And we've already talked about this in lab. And hopefully by now you were either in lab last week and or you watched the video by now. If not, please do. And we were talking about, I don't remember whose shirt it was. I think it was Valencia. He had on a yellow shirt. And I asked everybody, why is that shirt yellow? Or this. These are yellow chairs. Why are these chairs yellow? Can someone tell me? Hopefully you can remember this. It's a very important concept in the lab.
It absorbs every color but yellow.
Yes, perfect. These chairs are yellow because as this white light hits it with all the colors, white light is all the colors, those chairs absorb all the colors other than yellow. It's reflecting yellow back because that is the one color that it's not absorbing. So chlorophyll, again, it's green. That means leaves are basically absorbing all the colors except green. Green is the one color that gets reflected back, and that's why they look green to us. That's how light works. So are there any questions about this slide or that concept? All right. Stomata. Stomata are the tiny holes that are in the leaves. In a sense, you could almost think of it if plants had mouths. In a sense, that would be it, because that's where they let the carbon dioxide in and the oxygen out. They also lose water that way, though, so they're allowed to close it. And now I'm going to put a big X in this, because this also will not be on the exam. It's a good time for me to tell you, this portion of the exam is going to be a lot like the respiration portion of the exam, which is going to be me saying, in which stage does this happen? In which stage is this produced? In which stage is this used, right? So keep that in mind as I go through this chapter. I'm keeping an eye on my watch. I don't want to make the same mistake as I did last time. Thylakoids. These are the membranes inside the chloroplast where all the magic happens. Your book gets pretty specific, mentions that they're double membranes. I'm going to show you a picture of it. I'm going to go through it quickly, though, because, again, I'm not going to ask you anything about this. There's a picture of that happening. Again, the stomata lets the gases in. We're going to zoom in there. You can see here is one plant cell, and there's a bunch of chloroplasts in it. And this is a drawing of what they look like. And again, none of this is going to be on the exam. I'm not going to show you a picture and ask you what parts are which. You just need to know that photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. All right. Now the more important stuff. The overall equation is carbon dioxide and water are used to make glucose and oxygen. And again, this is just the opposite of respiration. So if you can remember respiration, even though it's cellular respiration, it's a good hint, a good way to remember how it works is just think about our respiration, right? You breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide and water. So if you can remember photosynthesis is the opposite of that, you should be good. And just like respiration, or just like our conversation about respiration, you will notice that it's 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water give us 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. And I told you for cellular respiration that you did not need to know that ratio. And I'm telling you that for photosynthesis as well. I'm just trying to make things easy for you. You don't need to know 6, 6, 6, and 1. Just know that carbon dioxide and water are used to make glucose and oxygen. And of course, the whole thing here is this requires energy, right? Glucose is a energetic molecule, so to speak. It takes energy to build it. And that's where the light energy comes in. Any questions about this slide? So again, I mean, everybody's study is differently, but my recommendation is memorize this basic stuff and then start adding the details. Memorize the equation. And again, the test question is going to be something like, which of the 2 stages produces uses carbon dioxide? Which of the 2 stages uses water? Which of the 2 stages produces glucose? Which of the 2 stages produces oxygen? That's how the exam's going to go. Your book reminds you at this point that respiration is sort of like a fall for the electrons. Remember where I kept saying we're stripping away these high energy electrons, and they were high energy when they started, right? High energy, and then they lose that energy, and that energy is used to pump hydrogen ions against the concentration gradient. In this case, it's the opposite. Here, we just have regular old electrons, and we're boosting them up. We're making them high energy. In the same way, again, for respiration, we broke down glucose, and we harvested those high energy electrons, and they went down, 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 and eventually made it to oxygen, and that formed water. Here, it's the opposite. Here, the water is like, all right, here's some electrons, and that produces oxygen, and then those electrons get boosted and incorporated into the molecule of glucose. So here's some test questions too. If you're taking notes. For the last chapter, the question is, where do the electrons come from? Where do they go? They come from glucose, they go to oxygen. For photosynthesis, the question is, where do they come from? The electrons come from water, and that produces oxygen. So you will need to know that for the exam. And the good news is, like I said in chapter 6, for this exam, when you think of electrons and water and oxygen, those things go together. Because you're either producing oxygen when the water gives up the electrons, or if we're talking about respiration, we're producing water when the oxygen takes the electrons. So all these things are connected. Any questions? All right. So again, that's cellular respiration. That's what we just finished. That's chapter 6. And now what we're looking at, photosynthesis, is the opposite. We could just draw arrows this way. Water gives up some electrons, which produces oxygen. Then those electrons get energized and eventually incorporated into a molecule of glucose.
I have a question.
Yes, good.
Were you not doing like keywords for today?
Good call. Yeah, let's do it. The first word then is fire alarm. Like I said, I had a heck of a weekend. I'm exhausted. I'm not thinking straight, so I appreciate you. And who said that? Was that Reed?
Yes.
Okay. When you email me the keywords, remind me that you said that, and you'll get a little extra credit for your attendance for fixing me up.
All right. Thank you.
Anyway, again, respiration, 3 stages, right? And most of the test questions are going to be, which stage does this happen? Which stage does that happen? Photosynthesis, a little bit easier because there's only 2 stages. And most of the exam is going to be, or at least this portion of it will be, in which stage does this happen? In which stage does that happen? In which stage is oxygen produced? In which stage is water used? All that stuff. So let's jump into it. Oops, wrong way. Light reactions. This is where the chlorophyll is used. That will be a test question. People will get it wrong, and I will want to cry again. Obviously, if chlorophyll is a pigment, and it's the thing that's absorbing the light, obviously that's going to be in the light reactions. It's in the name, light reactions, right? Why would you want chlorophyll and the other part, right? Just remember, light reactions, chlorophyll. It just makes sense. I don't know how people miss that question. Some of this is hard, I will admit. but some of it like that is pretty common sense. And I'm not going to try to trick you on the exam. So how does chlorophyll do this? How does it absorb the solar energy? It converts chemical energy. Basically, it converts the solar energy to make ATP and NADPH. So you need to know this. So many test questions on this slide. Which of the two stages uses chlorophyll? Light reaction, right? Which of the two stages produces ATP and NADPH? And it's light reactions. That's a little bit harder. That'll definitely be a test question. Oh, and notice this. Here's a word I've never shown you before, right? I've never shown you this word, but can anybody guess what that thing does? Just based on what the word looks like and what you know from cellular respiration. Anybody want to guess? For 1 point of independent work, if you get it right. NADPH. Or maybe I'm asking the wrong questions here. Does anybody even remember what?
The electron carriers.
There you go. Vance got it. Remind me when you email me today for a little extra credit that you got that right. It's an electron carrier, right? Just like, well, I didn't finish what I was writing, but NADH, electron carrier. FADH2, electron carrier. NADPH, electron carrier. I told you that in the last chapter. I said, if you see any molecules that look like that, that means they are carrying electrons. And again, I'm not going to try to trick you. So when you see anything that looks like that on the exam, just think that's an electron carrier. I'm not going to give you some word that looks like that, but that I made up, right? So NADPH, electron carrier. So here we go. Again, test questions. Which of the three stages produces ATP and NADPH? The answer is light reactions. And hopefully this is easy for you to remember too, because light is energy, right? Light is energy. So it should make sense that the light reactions, those are the ones that are going to be using that light energy and producing something energetic, specifically ATP and NADPH, high energy electrons, in other words, right? Also, light reactions is where the water is used. I kind of already said that, I just never said it specifically in this context, because I already told you water is the thing that gives up those electrons, right? The electrons are going to be incorporated into this electron carrier. So you do need to know that for the exam too. Which of the two stages uses water? Light reactions. Which of the two stages produces oxygen? Light reactions. And again, I'm hoping you can remember this. No matter what we're talking about, whether it's cellular respiration or photosynthesis, hopefully you can remember this whole water and oxygen and electron relationship, right? Anything to do with water is going to have to do with oxygen. So for the exam, keep that in mind. If you can remember, I don't know, if for some reason you can remember water is in the light reactions, then hopefully you can automatically think, okay, well then if water is used, that means oxygen is produced. Or vice versa. Maybe you can remember the oxygen part, but not the water part. So any questions about the light reactions? And again, this is just an overview. We're going to go into more detail later. All right. So let's talk about the next one, the Calvin cycle. Oh yeah, a good time to remind you. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle basically uses the products of light reactions. And in a sense, the Calvin cycle is the meat and potatoes, if you will, because the purpose of photosynthesis is to make glucose. And it's the Calvin cycle that actually makes the glucose. So the light reactions are basically there to support the Calvin cycle. Sort of like glycolysis and the citric acid cycle are there to support electron transport chain. Same thing here. Calvin cycle is the sugar factory, so to speak. So it uses what the light reaction gave it, which is energy, specifically ATP and NADPH, and we'll talk about that again later. So this is the thing that uses carbon dioxide. This is the thing that uses ATP. This is the thing that uses the high energy electrons. So those will all be test questions. Which of the two stages uses carbon dioxide? Calvin cycle. And remember, I said this in chapter 6. In chapter 6, we talked about the citric acid cycle and all those C's. So no matter what we're talking about for this exam, when you think of carbon dioxide, whether it's being used in photosynthesis or produced in respiration, you should think of cycles. Carbon dioxide cycles, CCC. Remember, I also didn't even call the Krebs cycle the Krebs cycle, but that's the other word for it, right? I called it the Calvin cycle, citric acid cycle on purpose, because I want you to associate all those C's with carbon dioxide. I'm hoping that part of the exam is easy for you. But anyway, yes. Which of the two stages uses carbon dioxide? Calvin cycle. Which of the two stages uses ATP? Calvin cycle. That part will be tricky, I'll admit. People miss that question all the time. That one doesn't make me as sad because that's an easy thing to screw up. So remember, light reactions produce ATP and NADPH. Calvin cycle uses ATP and NADPH. The next word for attendance will be coffee. Like the thing that I'm drinking, not having enough of. Any questions about this slide? All right. And again, my recommendation when you study this first. This is the big picture. Then once you have this memorized, then start worrying about the details. Here's a picture of everything we're talking about. Again, photosynthesis happens on the chloroplast. We get light energy. The water gives up an electron that produces oxygen. Those electrons are energized and carried away by the NADPH. That's our electron carrier. And in the process, we're producing ATP. Why? Because the Calvin cycle needs energy to produce glucose. It needs energy and it needs high energy electrons. The Calvin cycle takes all that carbon dioxide from the air, squishes them together to make glucose. Any questions about this slide? And again, we're going to cover this in more detail soon. All right. Here we go. If you download the PowerPoint, you can watch this little animation. I know some of you have already watched that video that I shared, the biology crash course. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't. He basically says everything I say, but a lot quicker and a lot more entertaining. I'm not going to lie. Anyway, the incorporation of carbon from the air into organic compounds, that's called carbon fixation. And that's what takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that's a good thing because too much carbon dioxide makes things hot. In a way, it's almost good, though. Without any carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it would just be too cold on Earth. With life as we know it wouldn't be here. I mean, there'd be some life forms, but it wouldn't be like we know it. Anyway, I'm going to put a big old X through this slide, too. Not because this isn't important, because it really is, but because for the exam, it is not important. Because I will not ask you anything on this slide on the exam. Any questions about that slide? All right. This bullet point we can do very quickly and easily because I've been talking about it already. This should be a review for you. The nature of sunlight. Sunlight is a type of energy called electromagnetic energy. And that is yet another question that I will not be asking you on the exam. Light is it's interesting. It kind of acts as waves, but it also has particles, so to speak. And we'll come back to that here in a second. The distance between the crest of the waves is called the wavelength, and the full range of radiation is called the electromagnetic spectrum. And watch me put a big old X through this, because again, this will not be on the exam. It is worth noting, though, that the shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. And someone said that earlier in lab when we were talking about the hypothesis of whether or not the different color of lights will affect photosynthesis. And someone said yes, and their reasoning was that so many, different colors have different light, different energy. So this is lower energy, the red side. The blue side is higher energy. Anyway, any questions about that? Okay. Again, this shouldn't be a test question. If anything, and I probably won't do this either. If anything, I might just give you this picture and ask you a question about it, like just to make sure that your brain can function enough to look at something and figure something out. So I might say something like, I might show you that picture and say, which one has more energy, microwaves or infrared? And you can look at it and say, okay, that's high energy, that's low energy, Infrared has more energy, right? Nothing to memorize there. I'm just saying I might give you that picture and ask you to decipher it. Should be pretty simple. When light shines on a pigment, certain wavelengths or colors are absorbed and others are reflected. You already know that. I keep saying it. Talked about Valencia's yellow shirt and these yellow chairs. Same thing. And it was in the 19th century the botanists first discovered that only certain wavelengths are used by plants. I'm going to put an X through that bullet point. I'm not going to be asking you that detail. And again, this bullet point, we keep saying it, right? Whatever's reflected off, that's what the color is. Also, have you ever worn a black shirt in the summertime and it got really hot? That's why. Black absorbs all the colors. Anyway, again, the process of science, we will skip it as we always do. Again, I highly recommend reading it and letting me know if you have questions. There will be no questions about it on the exam, but there will be questions about it on the study guide. Here we go. Chloroplast pigments. Oh, we're moving right along. This is awesome. Chloroplast pigments. You probably already know everything I'm about to tell you. The selective absorption of light by leaves is why they appear green. Again, they're green because every other color is absorbed. Green is the thing being reflected back to our eyeballs. This is another good time to remind you of this bullet point from chapter 5. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. So when light hits it, that energy has to be converted to other forms, which is what we're going to talk about. Your book also points this out. I don't know if I'm going to have this on the exam or not. When we talk about chlorophyll or chloroplasts, which is where photosynthesis happens, there's actually more than one pigment. It's not just chlorophyll. There's actually chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and then something completely different called carotenoids. Let's talk about all three of these things. So if you're writing and you're thinking I'm going too quick, don't worry about it because we're going to talk about each one of these individually. Chlorophyll A, that is the one that participates directly in the light reactions. It absorbs mainly blue, violet, and red light. Obviously not green, right? Because, well, it's green. For the exam, if anything, you would just need to know that chlorophyll A is the one that participates directly in the light reactions. I'm not going to ask you which colors it absorbs. Just know, again, that it does not absorb green. So any questions about chlorophyll A? All right, chlorophyll B. It absorbs mainly blue and orange lights, and it conveys this absorbed energy to chlorophyll A. So again, this bullet point right here, I'm not going to ask you about. I'm not asking what they absorb. But of course, you can see they're kind of a team, right? Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, they absorb slightly different colors. And again, what you need to know is chlorophyll A, that's the one that's involved directly in the reaction. And chlorophyll B conveys the absorbed energy to chlorophyll A. Should be easy, right? It's in the name, in a sense. Like A and B, you would figure A is the primary one, right? So any questions about chlorophyll A or chlorophyll B? All right, the next word for attendance is going to be pumpkin, like that orange fruit. And that brings us to carotenoids. Carotenoids absorb mainly blue-green light. And again, I'm not going to ask you that. You can basically think of carotenoids as sunblock for leaves. They absorb and dissipate excessive light energy that might damage the chlorophyll. So again, chlorophyll A, directly involved in the reactions. Chlorophyll B, pretty much there to support chlorophyll A. And then the carotenoids are basically there as protection. Sunblock for the leaves. Any questions about this slide? All right. Some carotenoids are human nutrients, and you're probably familiar with them. Beta carotene, right? And that's why the word was pumpkin, by the way. I was getting to this. That's why they're orange, because there's carotenoids in them. That's why carrots are orange. If you want to look this up for independent work, you could look up what color carrots used to be because they were not naturally orange. Humans made them orange. And you could look up the story has something to do with some royalty in Europe. But yeah, carrots were not originally orange. Anyway, that's beta carotene. Lycopene, that gives that's red stuff. Tomatoes, watermelon, red peppers. It's an antioxidant. It's really good for you. And I'm going to put a big old X on this side as well. That's good for you to know this stuff, but it's not going to be on the exam. Any questions about this slide? All right. Fall colors. When you see that, it's mostly due to the carotenoids. So those fall colors are actually there all year. You just don't see them. What happens in the fall is that the chlorophyll starts going away. The carotenoids are left, and that's where we get our fall colors. Not important as far as the exam is concerned. Any questions about that side? All right. Again, all these different pigments kind of act like a team, right? They absorb different colors. Chlorophyll A is really good with that color. Chlorophyll B is good with that one. The carotenoids are good there. And of course, we've got those. And of course, green, that's the one color that's really not very useful to a plant because it's not absorbing those colors. Any questions about this slide? Oh yeah, let me put a big X to this too. To remind you, there's nothing here that you need to memorize. But again, I might give you this picture on the exam and ask you to decipher it. I might give you this picture and say, what wavelength of light is absorbed mostly by chlorophyll A? And you could guess, it would be multiple choice. And the one close to 400 or 700 would be the answer. Any questions? No questions? All right. And again, I probably won't ask you that, but if I did, I would give you that picture and just ask you to decipher it. All right, let's talk about how the photosystems actually harvest light energy. Like we already said, light behaves as waves, but it also acts as discrete packets of energy, and these discrete packets of energy are called photons. That's what you need to know for the exam on this slide. You need to know what a photon is. So when I use the word photon, you need to understand it. It's a fixed quantity of light energy. Sort of like a proton is a positive thing inside of a cell. An electron is a negative thing that goes around the outside of a cell. Excuse me, good grief, an atom. Photons, light energy. That's what you should think of when you think of photons. Light energy. Photons equals light energy. And again, your book points out, and I'm not going to ask you this, but the shorter the wavelength, the greater the energy of the photon. In other words, like the blue, violet colors have more energy than the red colors. And I'm going to put an X through that because I won't be asking you that. You just need to know what a photon is. Because mostly, even if I don't ask you on the exam, I'm going to be using the word photons a lot when I'm teaching you how photosynthesis works. What happens when a pigment molecule absorbs a photon? It excites the electrons. Remember, this is what the whole thing's about, is getting high energy electrons. And that's how they're excited. And again, that's why when you wear a black shirt outside in the summertime, you get hot because it absorbs all those photons and it literally puts off heat. And then your book goes on to talk about how some of them release light, about how a photon can hit and excite something.
Get out.
We have something called fluorescence. But as far as photosynthesis is concerned, that is not very important.
Let's end at 8:50.
It is 8:50. The last word for attendance is going to be mask. This thing right here. All right. If anybody needs me, you know how to find me on online for office hours.
Yeah.
Do what? Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah. You guys don't forget to email me, please.